Hi.
I should probably know. Well, hold on. Is this doing a full page thing? Let's see. I just want the whole thing. Let's see, single page. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. All right. Sweet. I just gotta find this on the computer too here. So I have both things here. Okay. Hi everyone. My name's Stephen Weigel. I'm from Ball State University, which is in Muncie, Indiana. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, so that's only an hour away. I went there for my undergraduate in music media production, and then I figured out I wanted to do composition sort of towards the end of my senior year, or a little bit earlier. So, that meant I wanted to finish out the MMP degree and then move on to composition. In this presentation, I want to talk about some important microtonal information, like sort of how to get you started, but not really go into the math of anything. And then I'd like to go over some of my pieces. I have 4 I'd like to show you today, because actually they're all pretty short. Although I'll stop one sort of when it's close to the end. I'll also mention important sources for further exploration, and I'll share that to the CNMF group, if that's okay, if I can just post some links of helpful places to visit when you're expanding your knowledge of this kind of information. Some of the teachers I've studied with are Michael Pounds. I don't know if any of you have heard of him, but he was in engineering for a really long time, and he got degrees from the University of Illinois, and he's done a lot of international stuff, and so has Dr. Patrick Chan, who I've also studied with. I studied with Dr. Kothman, Keith Kothman, and Daniel Swilley, who's a student of Scott Wyatt. Let's see. I guess some composers I've been influenced by are Ben Johnston and Harry Partch. And definitely Charles Ives. I just feel like they have a lot to say, and they really know how to construct things in an intelligible way. And there's a lot of Xenharmonic composers I like too, who aren't really very famous yet and are very academic, like Aaron Kister Johnston, for example, who mostly works with computer stuff. So these composers, I think they inspire me because they show an awareness of form and how to use it. And they have this desire to explore new sounds that are recognizably linked and that reference each other. So if you ever want to know more about the Xenharmonic groups, there's lots of Facebook groups, and that is where they hang out. Usually the Xenharmonic people tend to cluster in different chat rooms and such. It started in a Mills College emailing list, and then evolved to a Yahoo chat thing, and now it's on Facebook, so that's where it is right now. If you want to get the information, they're always talking all day, so it's very exciting. So before diving into this, I want to talk about my compositional philosophy a little bit, because I do have one. I like that composition puts us into a situation where we're encouraged to find new things, and I like the idea that newness alone can contribute to our idea of goodness. I consider it sort of my mission as a composer to discover as many new sounding textures, ideas, and aesthetics as possible with my music. But a particular brand of newness must also line up with my other requirements, namely that pieces have unique and distinct characteristics that inform and edify themselves. This often means that my pieces end up being melodic, and if not, memorable in some other way that is easy to name, even if not actually entirely designed in a simple way. I don't align with the new objectivity of the 20th century exactly, like Hindemith sort of thing, but I do think that my pieces should be comprehensible and fairly easy to glimpse the design of, by an alert and musically literate listener. The composer should always make it obvious that thought was put into designing the piece. And the composer should always be goal-oriented and desiring to achieve a result that cannot simply be made up on the spot as a reason for certain craftsmanship errors, something I've witnessed a few times. I also believe that pieces should have meanings attached to them, but that meaning does not necessarily have to be referential. Usually for me, that kind of meaning is more comfortably explored in my music as part of the human mind and its thoughts, as opposed to external circumstances or historical events. Sorry, that's all I'm really trying to say there is that I'm more interested in philosophy than history, and it kind of shows. So let's talk about microtonality, or Xenharmonics. For our purposes, they might be the same word, but not exactly. As someone dedicated to finding new sounds, I am engaged with Xenharmonics, so I avoid writing in 12-tone equal temperament because I feel like everybody else is already doing it. Now, Xenharmonic music is merely defined as music that does not sound like 12-tone equal temperament. That's sort of the exact terminology. So you might be able to have something in another tuning system, let's say you use the diatonic scale in 5-limit just intonation or Pythagorean tuning. both of those could kind of sound like 12-tone equal temperament. So in the right context, they might not actually be xenharmonic. And of course, being xenharmonic is a sliding scale and isn't, you know, it's like a gray area like everything in music is. So now let's talk about how to explore it. In order to start exploring and audition the sounds, I recommend having a MIDI keyboard plugged into a computer and then using a synthesizer. How many of you have MIDI keyboards? Oh, that's good. A lot of you already. So this means you can all explore it. So here are just some pictures of some of the softwares I think do a really good job. Absinthe is a really common native instrument, and so is Contact. I don't know if you guys have ever used the native instruments packages, but I got Absinthe for $100 with an educational discount, which I didn't think was too bad. I also got Logic Pro for $100. That's sort of the DAW I use, and I think the setup you will want to use depends on whether you want to hear playback into notation or a digital audio workstation. Now, I find it much easier to use a digital audio workstation and then like tediously notate things by hand depending on what I want to do. Unfortunately, that's not the most efficient way, but it tends to be hard to get software to cooperate and do playback. Although it is possible. I've heard LilyPad is good, and MuseScore is good, and Ian actually knows about 72-tone equal tempered font, downloading that to MuseScore, so you might want to ask him about that particular issue. But these are also some other great sources. That one on the top left, that's Scala. Now Scala is this incredible tuning tool that acts as sort of a third-party software. If you were to download it, you can create like basically any scale imaginable. Like the capabilities it has are insane. And then you save a file, just like a tuning file, and then the synthesizer can accept the tuning file. Absinthe is a synthesizer, and there's a trick I use to easily write an equal temperament with it without having to use Scala, because I haven't gotten it to work on my computer yet, but it is possible to do that with a lot of synthesizers. You can use Max MSP. There's also Pure Data. Pure Data is kind of like a free version of Max. I don't really know a lot of their differences, but they can both do microtones easily and post VSTs. So you could just like put Absinthe in Max if you wanted. And Logic Pro, I think some of its synths come with built-in tuning changes, although you can only do 12-note scales with that. I know Brendan Byrnes used that for one of his latest albums. He's a popular Xenharmonic artist. And then the Xenhar's website has lots of free synths. A lot of the plug synths are free and support retuning, and so does Tasman. So those are just some sources you can use. And if you have any questions about this stuff, please ask me. It's a requirement of this conference that you have microtones set up on your computer before you leave. Just kidding. Okay, let's talk about how to explore the instruments some more. There's some DIY instruments and some instruments that you can sort of mess with. And actually, I just realized there's one I forgot about to mention, but I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so percussion instruments are the easiest to build yourself, but they're probably some of the hardest to get people to convince to play, you know. So up there, I think that's a Craig Grady instrument. Craig Grady and Irv Wilson worked together, and they built this wonderful marimba here. There's a glass marimba at the bottom right. That's a 31-tone. And then there's Harry Partch's Cloud Chamber Bowls, of course. So when lots of people build percussion, they sometimes use like cans or glass or lots of other things. You can even take wine glasses and fill them up with different amounts of water to do that. I've seen a lot of music that does that. I have yet to write a convincing wine glass piece. It's a little bit harder to build marimbas, but with good good woodworking skills, sorry, I can't talk, building a marimba is a lot cheaper than buying one, which is a really rare circumstance in the microtonal community where you have an instrument that's actually cheaper. Some other easy DIY projects are Utterbots. There's an Utterbot, which are ways to turn glass bottles into sliding pitch instruments, or kalimbas, which are thumb pianos, Uis, little like electronic woodwinds, and actually retuning a dulcimer is also a good idea. By that I mean a hammer dulcimer. I forgot to include a picture, but if you don't know what that is or something, you can talk to me afterwards. It's really easy to retune like a piano, but they're actually unfortunately pretty expensive. I'm sort of using one that Ball State has like lent me now through strange circumstances. And of course there are woodwinds which are not built to play microtonal music, but that can, most easily in the higher range. That's not something that's confined to the flute, as Orlando was telling me the other day. That's true on all instruments, basically, that are woodwinds, because if you go really low and like hit the bottom notes, then to even hit like a half step on like a Native American flute, you have to do a half bowl. That's really annoying, and that kind of principle extends through all of the woodwind instruments. So definitely writing higher microtones is a good idea. Let's see. And then we have guitars here. there's a picture of me playing my 19-tone guitar, which is over there. I won't play it for you. And that's a picture of, I think, a 31-tone guitar that Ron Sword made. What's really strange about stringed instruments is how they can contrast between fretless instruments and fretted instruments. Fretted instruments are actually kind of easy to make, and so it's easy to come up with microtonal guitars if you're in contact with the right people. And I realize that's a lot more work than downloading a synthesizer. So, I mean, it's something that you should try if you, try to network, but not really the same as getting a synthesizer. There's also a really cool trick you can do with a fretted guitar. And this is a trick that you can use to play in various equal temperaments. So if you have a 12-tone equal tempered guitar, you can play in 8-tone, 9-tone, 10-tone, 11-tone, and 12-tone, and you can play with all of those multiples. Charles Ives' pieces where he has two pianos and wants to tune a quarter tone off. That's a lot of the reason why people use quarter tones is because, 12 times 2, so now I have two 12-tone instruments, how lovely. Here's an example of how I can play an 11 and 10-tone equal temperament. Again, like with the Utterbots, I'm using a disposable resource that people normally just throw in the trash. I'm using wine corks. So, contact your alcoholic friends, make sure they give some of these away. Just stick them under your guitar bridges, and voila, you should have an 11-tone string. See how this is the octave normally right here? This one isn't tight, but on a 12-tone string, you have this area as the octave where there's the double dots. But now here, the octave is here. So now we can play an 11-tone equal temperament if you stick those under the whole guitar. And here, if I stick the cork up a little farther even, I can play a 10-tone equal temperament. So watch this. See, look, here's the 10th fret right here. So you can play in all of those equal temperaments, and 10 is particularly valuable because it gives you a new prime number, 5. So then you can also play in 5-tone equal temperament, and you figure out with the equal temperaments that there's a lot of shared DNA between numbers that you can exploit if you're interested in exploring. And that's precisely what I did in the first piece I'm going to show you. So hopefully this has given you some ideas for playing in different equal temperaments with guitars, because I think when guitar players are in a situation where they have to read tab, that's a situation that translates easily into scordatura. So I think that's going to be really helpful for ushering in this new wave of interested musicians if you just hand them a microtonal guitar and tab, and potentially if it's someone who already hates music theory, what are they going to say? I don't like it. I mean, there's really nothing to say at that point. Let's briefly go over notation before I dive into the first piece. These are just 3 examples. There are lots of other ways to do it, but these tend to be some of the most useful. And under that first point, I should have included something like sense deviations as well, because I tend to use sense deviations when things are close to 12 and share a lot of DNA with it, as I mentioned earlier. Like 9-tone equal temperament and 12-tone equal temperament, well, they share the augmented chord, because 9 can be divided by 3 evenly, and so can 12. And that sort of rule is true for all equal tunings, which is why 72 equal is in vogue. It's 12 times 6, so it's just delightful. There are all the accidentals right there. Ezra Sims accidentals. And Ian actually does about that too. There are just intonation-based accidentals, which actually don't necessarily look like that. Ben Johnston used them, but it's sometimes really cumbersome. So there's that. And then there's sagittal notation, which can be used when you want to notate something and you might not sure whether you want it to be just intonation or equal temperament at all. So those are just some examples for you, and a lot of the fonts can be downloaded and coordinated to make a playback, although that's a little bit tough. Okay, I think that's the end of that part of the presentation. Now let's move on to the pieces. First I want to play you Tenacious Chorale. This is a piece that I wrote for 6 guitars. 3 of them are tuned in 9-tone equal temperament, and 3 are tuned in 8-tone equal temperament. We're only going to play a bit of the first movement in 9-tone equal temperament, because unfortunately the studio performance had a few mistakes at the end. So I'll go through a little bit of it, and then we'll talk about some of the other ones. Turn this on. Oh, And I also don't have notation for it because 21, not very friendly. Because with the 9-tone guitars, it's really, what you have to do, of course, is, since you've got the common factor of 3, you can only play the augmented chord on each string. And then you have to skip all the other frets. So that meant that I had to tune it so that, like, consecutive steps were next to each other string-wise. So that was, clearly extremely abnormal for the players. So that really didn't help, and I really don't think the electric guitar player liked playing this piece very much. He kind of like got into it and didn't know what he was getting into, I think. That wasn't my fault though, because the bass player really liked it, and I was the acoustic guitar player. So there are definitely some parts where it's like they were trying to read the tab, and they actually weren't used to reading that because it's kind of a mismatch with what they've been used to reading. It almost might have been more helpful to like write the scordatura music in without the tab, and then just have it not sound anything like that. So that was definitely kind of an issue. And of course, I do have to be repetitive to get the stuff in people's ears. I feel like that's sort of a good way to establish sort of a syntax, is through repetition. So, yeah. Yes, Nathan?
Yeah, I guess first off, like, it's always so interesting with like dealing with different temperaments, how after a while, like, your head starts to wrap around it and it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
Like, I promise you guys, if you listen to this for like 30 minutes and then go listen to like a C major chord, it's just going to be the most jarring experience ever. But question about your guitar. Are you like, when you put the corks in, is that like a very specific point that you're putting the corks in, or is it kind of like approximated until you get this this part, like where your hand goes, I guess?
That's a good question. I have no knowledge as to the mathematical calculation. I know some people who do, and one particular person who doesn't really like this method. But what I do is I stick the cork under there, and then I keep trying it until it works. So like I had it prepared before I walked in because I didn't want to like stick it under there and figure it out and waste time in the presentation.
So then, are you alternating? Like, are you tuning the strings differently, or like, is it standard tuning with just the preparation of the corks?
You can do standard tuning or just any other tuning really. The cork will still operate in the same way and do the same kind of
So even if you change the tension of the string, like the octave won't change, right? So like if you had that E string, which isn't an E anymore, but like you tuned it down to a standard D or whatever, the octave wouldn't change. Your octave is what it,
That's right. It could still be an 11-tone octave if you put the cork in the right place, or a 10-tone octave. Well, so yeah, that's cool. Yes, Brian.
So when you were first starting out and you found this music, how did you go from I've just discovered this to I'm going to preach this to the masses? Like,
that's a really good question. I knew that like just hearing it is just so exciting. I guess I can't describe it. And I also feel like, especially being at Ball State, that I'm the only person who gives a crap. Although that's not true anymore. I mean, you know, I have had some teachers who have written in quarter tones and with like sliding pitch, but not in the Xenharmonic way. And maybe being Xenharmonic is not necessarily always about being repetitive, but that's usually like a trademark is, okay, if I've got a Xenharmonic tuning system, I'm treating some group of notes as diatonic-like, and I'm just using those notes, and then the ear is figuring out those. So, I don't know, I guess there's just a lot of things that draw me into the system, like the fact that it's so neglected, and like, it's so mathematical and interesting, and like, broadens my knowledge of all instruments, helps with ear training, the list goes on and on. So, yeah.
I was just interested in how you go about starting a piece, because like, I mean with the last one you showed us, I was curious whether it's like with a fugue or something of a similar thing where you're almost just putting microtonality into that context where it already exists sort of in that equal tempered sort of world that we're aware of. So I was just curious, like when you're starting a piece, are you sort of thinking, oh, I want to explore like, you know, 9-note equal temperament, or are you sort of thinking, I want to write a fugue and I'm just going to have microtonality in it?
That's a really good question. There have been situations where I've imagined melodies and they're Xenharmonic and I don't know what tuning system they're in. So then I really try and get those down as soon as possible because they're pretty important. If something gets caught in my head and it's not even remotely anything like 12-tone equal temperament. But in this kind of situation, I was in a 9-tone world and like I was using a MIDI keyboard and synthesizer and sort of found what sounded good and then tried to work with that material just like I would 12-tone material, you know, developing it, changing it over time, figuring out how the texture should change. So yeah, it's actually pretty straightforward, but it is like, it's still like really hard to just like say, imagine things in 13-tone equal temperament. Like, I guess it doesn't really work that way, and it's a lot easier to imagine things in terms of intervals and where they're going and where they arrive, especially. That's a very important concept in Xenharmonics. The fact that error accumulates, and potentially if you were in 71-tone equal temperament and 72-tone equal temperament, and you played the right set of notes in 71-tone equal temperament, that might work out to a progression, and in 72 it might not, or vice versa. So yeah.
Yeah, because the other thing I also noticed is that I was interested in sort of how you explore harmony, because like part of the thing which I find really interesting about some of these systems is that, like, you know, with equal temperament, you get those sort of beatings within intervals where you can get the purest intervals if you divide the octave differently. So, and a lot of the stuff that you played us seemed to be sort of quite melodic driven. So I was interested in, I guess just what you're interested in exploring sort of harmonically as well.
Yeah, good question. I guess at this point I am interested in the sound of just intonation, but I really want to dig in and understand the equal temperaments themselves because I feel like it's easy to talk about. For the iridescent Wench fugue, I changed the spectrum of all the instruments so that they would harmonize well in 21-tone. And the chord at the end is not major or minor, but it can sound like either a minor chord in the first inversion or a major chord, depending on who you are. So I guess I'm really interested in ambiguous harmonies because that, that forces the listener to suddenly say, whoa, we're not in Kansas anymore. And I really like that. Being able to do that to listeners is, I think, really important. And Xenharmonics allows for that a lot. So yeah. Yes?
So for all of us plebs and normies who don't have perfect pitch, how did you get into this?
Well,
Like, where's a good place to start?
good place to start. Well, I would say starting with quarter tones and just intonation are two really good places. Quarter tones are going to be easy because they're just in the cracks, so you basically already have that. Learning how to sing something that doesn't sound normal to you is really important. And with just intonation, you can hear a lock and ring. So that is really helpful technique for harmony. Yes?
Could I just jump in and explain a little bit about what you were saying before?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're more interested in the sounds of pure chords, you might lean more towards just intonation, but if you're interested in the sound of, like with Steve's doing, you'd be more interested in the 24 radio quarter tone stuff.
So what about composers? Who would be a good place to start with that?
Ives.
Yes.
Well, obviously Ives, but like
Yeah,
maybe modern guys.
Oh, like modern, like Xenharmonic composers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see. There's some. Do you mean like for ear training purposes, or just like who to listen to?
Both.
Okay.
Joe Maneri,
I guess
Ezra
with-
Sims.
Yeah, Joe Maneri and Ezra Sims are good. I really like the Finnish composer Juhani Nuorvala. I'm probably not saying his name right, but I can send you a link later.
Yeah.
Julia
Fabio-
Lawrence.
Is Ezra
Fabio
Sims the guy
Questo.
who did like the microtonal exercises or whatever? Like, never, I'll give you about that. Never mind.
There are some people who have done that. Yeah, Easley
That's
Blackwood
what-
wrote
Easley, yeah.
microtonal etudes.
That's what it was. Yeah.
So those are really good. And they're really high quality. And
You should also look into the Boston Microtonal Society.
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
that's a good thing to do. Yeah. Okay, any more questions?
Thanks very much.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought along